Set aside everyday politics for just a second. In this analysis, we're diving straight into the raw, clinical biology of power. Welcome to our deep dive into the chemical engine of absolute control, what we're calling the testosterone high. We're going to explore how our neurochemistry, rather than our carefully constructed ideologies, fundamentally dictates how we organize human societies. We like to think of our political structures as the product of high-level philosophy and reasoned debate, but beneath the surface, driving the engine of who leads and who submits, is this vast, ancient biological operating system. So it brings up a question that challenges the very core of human free will. Are the leaders we elect truly our conscious, rational choice? Or are our deepest political loyalties just heavily dictated by ancient evolutionary wiring and sudden hormonal spikes? We view ourselves as enlightened modern citizens, casting logical votes, right? But as we're about to see, the clinical science actually suggests that our primate brains are making these snap, survival-based decisions about authority long before our logic ever catches up. The architecture of our societies is literally written in our DNA, driven by mechanisms designed to keep us alive in environments completely unlike the ones we live in today. Part 1. The two faces of leadership. Okay, let's dive into this. Evolutionary science reveals that all human leadership basically splits into two distinct, ancient survival strategies. On one side, we have prestige. Rooted in traditions like Confucianism, this is leadership driven by the sharing of knowledge, high empathy, and freely given respect. It takes massive cognitive effort to build. But on the exact opposite end is dominance. This is the Machiavellian tradition, a strategy built entirely on coercion, the threat of brute force, fear, and intimidation. These aren't just modern management styles or political platforms, you guys. They're deep-seated evolutionary algorithms. They're the two foundational ways our species figured out how to coordinate large groups to avoid extinction. Just think about the stark contrast between these two approaches. A prestige archetype, like a wise elder, a seasoned teacher, or a civil rights leader, draws followers voluntarily. They lead by sharing wisdom, demonstrating value, and offering mutual benefits to the group. Now contrast that with the aggressive dominance of a primate alpha or a modern authoritarian dictator. The dynamic shifts entirely. One coordinates the group through shared, mutually beneficial goals, while the other extracts total compliance by threatening severe, immediate costs to anyone who dissents. One builds a community, the other commands an army. What's truly fascinating here is how involuntarily our bodies react to these archetypes. Ever since our hunter-gatherer days, our brains have been hardwired to scan for subtle physical cues in milliseconds, just to recognize rank and avoid dangerous conflicts. Dominance instantly triggers specific physical markers: a downward head tilt, an expansive, aggressive posture taking up space, and a deep, resonant vocal pitch. Prestige, on the flip side, is signaled by an upward head tilt and a much more relaxed, open, unthreatening demeanor. And we process these signals entirely subconsciously. Before a leader even finishes their first sentence, your biology has already categorized their capacity for violence and your required level of submission. Part 2, the endocrinology of power. So the crucial point is what's happening inside the bodies of these individuals. It's what clinical researchers call the dominance cocktail, the ultimate testosterone high. Research proves that authoritarian leaders consistently exhibit a highly specific endocrinological mix: extremely high basal testosterone combined with abnormally low cortisol. Now, the high testosterone provides this relentless, aggressive drive for absolute power and status. But the low cortisol is the real biological danger here. Cortisol is our stress hormone. It acts like a biological brake, inducing anxiety and caution. When you drastically lower cortisol while spiking testosterone, you functionally remove the biological brake of fear and empathy. This exact chemical cocktail creates a ruler who is fearless, highly punitive, aggressively dominant, and completely unbothered by the suffering of others. And this chemical high doesn't just isolate itself in the leader, it fundamentally alters the physical biology of us, the followers. When we're exposed to a dominant-style leader, it actually bypasses the rational, reasoning centers of our brains entirely. Instead, it intensely activates subcortical areas like the amygdala and the striatum. These are our deepest, most ancient primate centers for threat processing, fear, anger, and primitive reward. It's a stark clinical reality. Following an authoritarian isn't a logical, intellectual choice. It's a primal biological reflex triggered by an acute stress response. Look at how differently our brains light up, depending on who is leading us. A prestige leader successfully activates the sophisticated cortical areas of our brain, specifically the anterior cingulate cortex and the medial prefrontal cortex. These are the regions responsible for social learning, deep empathy, and higher-order logic. The dominance pathway, however, operates entirely in the dark, tangled web of those primal survival circuits we just talked about. One neural pathway elevates us as collaborative, free-thinking humans capable of complex problem-solving. The other pathway actively suppresses our intellect, reducing us to our most basic, fearful survival instincts. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it shows just how deeply this is ingrained into our very species. Consider this. Human infants at just 21 months old already possess a cognitive evolutionary template to judge these specific leadership styles. Long before they can speak a single word or understand a single social concept, clinical eye tracking studies show that babies stare significantly longer in confusion when followers disobey a prestige-style leader compared to when they disobey a dominant-style one. They possess this innate, unlearned, biological ability to distinguish between a leader who relies on earned respect and one who rules through sheer fear and physical intimidation.
Part 3. The Psychology of Followers.
So, if we're biologically wired to recognize coercion, why do populations sometimes actively choose the authoritarian? Well, it all comes down to environmental triggers. During times of peace, stability, and prosperity, human populations naturally prefer prestige leaders with softer, non-dominant features. But everything shifts the second we introduce wartime conditions, resource scarcity, or extreme economic uncertainty. When a group feels existentially threatened, a biological switch literally flips in the collective consciousness. We suddenly desperately crave aggressive leaders with formidable, highly masculine features. The stress of the environment overrides our desire for empathy, replacing it with a primal demand for a fierce protector. Psychologists call this trigger mortality salience. When humans experience extreme, unpredictable fear, or the subconscious threat of our own death and ruin, we are biologically compelled to seek out grand authoritarian figures. Terrifying uncertainty completely rewires our psychological preferences. We subconsciously try to achieve a sense of protective, symbolic immortality by latching onto an alpha figure who appears invincible. This survival mechanism, which was designed to keep early humans safe from predators and rival tribes, is exactly what leads modern, normal societies directly into the dangerous, irrational worship of absolute power during times of national crisis. And this maps perfectly onto the evolutionary concept of the corner. When faced with overwhelming existential dread, humans have this biological imperative to retreat into a highly structured, protective sanctuary. In a state of collective panic, followers willingly, even eagerly, surrender their autonomy. We project our deep psychological need for a safe corner onto charismatic dominants who promise absolute, unyielding security. We effectively trade our personal freedom and critical thinking for a temporary reduction in fear and cognitive load. Basically, it just feels safer to let the strong man handle the danger, even if the ultimate price is our own liberty.
Part 4. Hierarchy and Our Future.
Let's move on and see how this all builds historically. For 95% of human history, we lived in small, egalitarian hunter-gatherer bands. Because groups were small, leadership was based purely on prestige, skill sharing, and group consensus. But the agricultural revolution changed absolutely everything. Human populations exploded virtually overnight, creating massive logistical chaos and intense resource competition, a phenomenon anthropologists call scalar stress. Our brains simply couldn't track social relationships past a certain number of people. So, to survive this sudden, crushing complexity, humanity essentially traded its ancient egalitarian roots for permanent, dominance-based authoritarian hierarchies. We invented kings, chiefs, and generals purely as a logistical mechanism to prevent societal collapse. Which brings us full circle to Machiavelli's famous observation from the 16th century: it is safer to be feared than loved. Machiavelli didn't have brain scanners, obviously, but he perfectly understood human neurochemistry. While dominance became an effective evolutionary tool to solve the organizational chaos of massive societies, its very nature relies entirely on weaponizing biological fear. It forces compliance to maintain stability, operating precisely on those ancient subcortical threat circuits and the testosterone-fueled aggression we examined earlier. Fear is computationally cheaper and way faster for a brain to process than love or rational agreement.
So what does this all mean? It leaves us with a profound and frankly provocative reality. Our biology undeniably craves hierarchy. Under stress, our brains actively seek out the chemical testosterone high of a dominant protector just to soothe our own anxieties. But are we condemned to be slaves to our own neurochemistry? We now possess the clinical science to understand exactly how our primal threat circuits work and how easily they can be manipulated. Moving forward, the ultimate test for humanity is whether we can use our higher cortical intellect to actively override this chemical reflex and reject the destructive worship of absolute power. Think carefully about that the next time you feel mysteriously drawn to a leader who promises you safety in exchange for your fear.